recently out in Lansing, our local state representative Noah Arbit played a role in passing legislation in the House of Representatives that would update Michigan's anti-hate crime legislation for the first time in decades. Of course, we live in a very diverse community with a number of different populations that could be impacted by, unfortunately, hate crimes, and this would help to address in some ways updating what diverse populations may be protected and many other details that would be important to you and others right here in Greater West Bloomfield. Here for more insight on those updates to the legislation and where these bills currently stand is State Representative Noah Arbit. Thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Thanks so much, Tyler. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to have you on to talk about this because, as we said, we live in a very diverse community, ethnically diverse, diverse in terms of sexuality, of race, of ethnicity, of age, and so on and so forth. So how did that factor into you putting an emphasis on updating these bills that are against hate crimes in the state of Michigan?
Yeah, well, I think public safety is something that's incredibly important to everyone in West Bloomfield. We've got an amazing police department, amazing fire department that really protects our communities. And what we know is that our police department and our can only enforce the laws that we have on the books. And growing up in West Bloomfield, as you mentioned, growing up in the Jewish community in particular, and understanding how diverse Greater West Bloomfield really is, I really was felt compelled and felt passionate about making sure that our diverse communities here in the Greater West Bloomfield area, and of course across the state of Michigan as well, are protected and can find accountability if they are victims of hate crimes. And that was really important to me. The Michigan's hate crime law is known to be woefully inadequate, hasn't been amended in 36 years, 7 years before I was even born in the 1980s when it was first passed. And we know that it doesn't leave a number of communities protected from hate crimes. And so, cases like we had, unfortunately, saw it at MSU, where a gay couple was beaten mercilessly, studying in the library, could not be charged as a hate crime under Michigan law. So making sure that we really have protections and that we build in the teeth to the law to make sure that people are protected. Particularly as a Jew, and understanding this really increase of anti-Semitism that we've seen over the past couple of years. This has been really important to me personally. And as I've been talking with constituents about how can we feel more safe as a community here in West Bloomfield and, of course, across the state. I think this legislation, the Michigan Hate Crime Act, which I was proud to sponsor and work on for the past 2 years, goes a long way to helping communities make sure that they are safe.
And you mentioned talking to constituents in our community about these issues that are of utmost importance to them. How did their insight factor in, not only to you putting this as something that was a point of emphasis on your docket in recent years, but also into those updates that ultimately went into these two separate bills that both passed in the House?
Yeah, well, and I think when you talk to people, in our community, and as I do as state rep, but also across the state, whether it's, Jewish people, Black people, gay people, Asian people, the Muslim community, people who, feel vulnerable in society, like, I'm a minority, and there's increased violence that is targeted against minorities, even if it doesn't, this is I think the most profound thing that I learned, that even if it doesn't happen to you, if a group of that you belong to, whether it's, again, maybe it's, a Black church was vandalized, or a gay bar was the target of some sort of criminal act. Whatever it is, if you're part of that community, even if you weren't the one who was specifically victimized, you feel it comes to you, and you feel scared, and you feel vulnerable. You feel like you were targeted as well. And so what we know about hate crimes is that there's never just one victim of a hate crime. An entire community is victimized too, because hate crimes are messaging crimes. They essentially tell a victim and a victim's entire community, people like you don't belong, people like you won't be safe here, and people like you aren't welcome here. And so what we know is that we really need to make sure that Michigan remains a state that is safe and welcome towards all these. This legislation was supported by law enforcement community, supported by a number of different groups representing these communities. And it was really important to bring together this the diverse group of stakeholders to say, listen, hate has no home here in the state of Michigan, and we're going to make sure that anyone who targets anyone on the basis of their race, religion, sexual orientation, age, we know seniors can be targeted by hate crimes, disabilities, people being targeted because they're mentally or physically disabled in some way. These types of crimes, they really do impact so many different people. And for me to be able to stand up and say, no, this is what I'm going to prioritize in my first term, making sure that our communities are protected and that our communities feel safe and secure in West Bloomfield and Greater West Bloomfield. I can find no higher calling than that.
Representative Noah Arbit joins us on The Splash Live, our local representative from Michigan's 20th House District, today on The Splash Live as the sponsor of two bills that update Michigan's anti-hate crime legislation that dates all the way back to 1988 in some cases. And Noah, you talk about these hate crimes and you gave us some specific examples. You have given us some specific examples statewide, but even close to home here in Greater West Bloomfield, we're not immune to seeing some of these hateful acts even in recent months here in our community, with various packages being sent and letters being sent to homes in our community. And so as we think about the Michigan Hate Crime Act and these bills that are now being updated, at least from the passage in the House and presumably later on should these pass the Senate and be signed by Governor Whitmer, what does this legislation do to bring those 1988 bills into 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it expands the scope of what types of crimes can be classified as hate crimes. It really is gold standard legislation. I read every single state's hate crime law. That there's only about 3 states that don't have hate crime laws on the books, and I sort of took what I thought was the best practices from across the country, dispensed with what I thought wasn't good or what didn't serve the people of Michigan. And created really what I think is gold standard legislation, and that has even been copied by Kentucky, and a couple of other states are looking into it right now. But it strengthens penalties. What we know is that people who commit hate crimes a lot of times go off into commit even more heinous acts, including murder. And so what we know is that if we're making sure that people get into this pipeline of if you're going to commit a hate crime, we want to interrupt that violence and make sure that you're not going to go on and commit another heinous act after that, because we're going to stop you right here and then. If you just treat hate crimes like a slap on the wrist, then you're not going to really protect the public. And so we strengthen the penalties. It's now going from a 2-year misdemeanor, high court misdemeanor, to a 5-year penalty or 5-year felony, and in some cases a 10-year felony with a maximum of 10 years in prison. So we're making sure that this really has teeth. We also, expanded the scope, as I said, of what crimes. And right now, as I said, seniors are not protected under this law, even though we know they can be victimized by hate crimes. The LGBT community is not protected under this law, and neither are people with disabilities. And there's also an emphasis here on gender-based violence, because we know that women very often are targeted with violence, any sort of domestic violence, or even, in some cases, femicide, murder that is motivated by misogyny, by hatred of women. All of that type of violence against women is included under this hate crime legislation. Rising anti-Semitism, all of that, in particular, as you mentioned, some of the incidents that we've seen here in Greater West Bloomfield, which has more Jews than any other community in the state of Michigan. So, really, what I hope that people in West Bloomfield understand is that we are taking hate-based violence seriously in the state of Michigan, and for the first time in 36 years, we're taking it seriously and making sure that that people have actual pathways to seek accountability and justice if they are targeted by a hate crime in the state of Michigan. And that's really the first time that we would ever have something like this on the books that will actually be effective. What we know is that, unfortunately, prosecutors are disincentivized from charging hate crimes right now because the penalties are so weak and the amount of resources that it takes to prove a hate crime in court is so substantial that very often they just don't feel that they can justify charging. So if we want to actually hold people accountable and make sure that we're disincentivizing the commission of hate crimes, then this law is really, really important. And I have every hope and confidence that we will see it pass the Senate as soon as Wednesday.
Well, that's really good news that it does potentially have that kind of legs in the Senate during our current session. And regardless of what the majorities may be in our legislature in Lansing, we know that even what was interesting with the initial passing in the House during this cycle was that it did receive some bipartisan support. So with that in mind, as we approach the potential upcoming day that this could pass in the Senate, how confident are you that that bipartisan support will reach from your chamber of our legislature into the Senate and ultimately put this on the governor's desk?
Well, to be honest, I actually think that there will be more bipartisan support in the Senate than there was in the House. It's just a different institution with different types of personalities, and what I really just try to emphasize with my colleagues is that election season is over, and that there was an election, we had it, and now it's time to actually govern for the people. And so I hope that that we can all agree that we have an interest in combating hate, that we have an interest in combating threats to public safety, and making sure that every citizen here in the state of Michigan is safe and secure, and that public safety officers, law enforcement, have the resources that they need to make sure that the public is protected. And one of those resources is this law, and making sure that this law can be utilized to hold violent criminals accountable.
Well, Noah, before we let you go, Representative Arbit, I want to give you a chance too. We know that this, in part, came to your desk as an effort of people in the community emphasizing that this was something that was an important issue to them here in Greater West Bloomfield and your further representation in the Lakes area. If people want to get in contact with you or have opportunities to dialogue on other issues of importance, what are some opportunities they may have regularly to do that?
Absolutely. Well, I just came from my year-end town hall where I updated our community about the latest legislation in Lansing and community updates from the Lakes area as well. But we have regular monthly community conversations where people can join, and we'll get the schedule as we work on building out our 2025 schedule of community conversations. They usually take place in Orchard Lake, and people can go to reparbit.com or email me at noaharbit@house.mi.gov. Or get on my email list, follow me on Facebook, State Representative Noah Arbit, to get all the details on coming to those events, or even just dropping me a line or an email about legislation that's before us, or legislation that you'd like to see to solve a problem here in our community, or something that you've experienced. It's really important for me to be able to understand what our community is facing, and how I can be of use to help solve some of those problems. So any ideas that people have here in West Bloomfield, Orchard Lake, Keego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, Commerce, that they want to share with me about issues that they're confronting and how the legislature may be brought to bear to solve them, I am all ears.
As he said earlier on, the election cycle is over. Now it's time to govern. Part of that comes from you, the people, after your voice has been heard in the election, to make sure your local representatives and your senators at the state level and at the federal level as well have your voice in their minds as well as they continue to do that governing. Representative Arbit, thank you so much for your time as always.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I appreciate it.